December 19th, 2023. We are interviewing Judy Swaz. My name is Esther Finder. Ms. Swaz is in Aventura, Florida. I am in Henderson, Nevada, in the United States, and the language will be English. Thank you for speaking with us today. What is your name, and can you please spell it?
My name is Judy Swaz. It's Judy, and Z like zebra, WAS.
What was your name at birth?
At birth, my name was Ida Lindner. It's Lindner.
Where were you born?
I was born in Černovec, Bukovina. It was Romania.
And when were you born?
In September 14, 1937.
And forgive me for asking, but how old are you today?
Well, if you'd add it up, I'm still 86.
What do you know about your hometown? Was it a big city?
Černovec was a big city. It had over 50,000 people, 50,000 Jews living in Černovec. It was a thriving city with Jewish schools and theater and yeshivas, and probably, I don't know, 50 synagogues or more, and so a lot of Jewish life. They had Jewish writers and some famous Jewish people that contributed to society.
What do you know about the relationships between the Jews and their neighbors in your town?
If you say what I personally know, I'd say nothing. I'm afraid I was too young to really be aware of anything, but I think the Jewish community was very educated and very intellectual or German-speaking town, and so that was actually my first language was German, because that was the quote language of the I don't know, society or whatever.
Had your family lived in that area for many generations?
My grandparents lived in the country, village called Havrilești, which was Romania. My father came from Delatin, Poland, to Černovec for his education, and my mother grew up on the farm in the village.
What religious traditions did your family observe?
Oh, we were very religious, Orthodox family. Even though my father was a Zionist, even in those days, but we were a very, very religious family.
What was your father's name?
My father was Josef Lindner.
And what was his occupation?
He was actually a salesman uh, of fine leather goods. And he did quite a bit of traveling. He traveled to Basarabia, to I don't know, the whole areas, and that's why he was probably was a guest of many rabbis in the different communities that he had to stay over. So
What was your mother's name? What work did she do?
my mother was Celia, actually in Europe her name was Zili, or Ziel in Yiddish, Storper. And she was a housewife. But she had grown up in the village. Her parents were very had a lot of land, and they were quite big landowners in Havrilleshti. And so mother was very resourceful when it came to whatever came her way.
Was your family considered affluent?
I don't know. I wouldn't call them affluent, but I certainly would not call them poor. I think my family, my father and mother built their own house. Uh, they probably moved into it about 6 months after I was born. And I'm sure they worked hard to save for it. Call it probably average.
Were you an only child?
No, I'm the youngest of three. Uh, my my sister, my oldest sibling is Ruti. Ruti was about say around 11, 12 when the war broke out. And my brother was 2 years younger. His name is Bernie Lindner. And I was 5 years later, and I was the youngest.
How long were you in Romania after your birth?
Excuse me?
How long were you in Romania after your birth?
Probably till the war broke out. I guess till the war broke out, yes.
When did the war reach you?
I think in 1941.
And then what happened when the war reached you? Where did your family go and how did you get there?
Okay, so I guess we had, I assume we have orders to evacuate, and what I basically remember is my father carrying a lot of heavy packages and carrying me at the same time as he was gathering our belongings to prepare for leaving. So he actually carried me and whatever stuff he could down to a relative down closer to the Jewish neighborhood, to the Jewish area, and left me there while he probably went to get some more stuff to carry with us. Uh, and probably a couple of days after staying at my uncle's and my father's aunt's house, uh, we went on the trains, and the trains were extremely crowded, as I remember, like standing room only, and everybody had their packages or luggage or whatever or you could barely sit as on your on your suitcase or whatever. Uh, and It took a long time. The train, it felt like at least 3 days on the train, coming and going and stopping and moving on. And then they dropped us off somewhere. Don't ask me where. And then the march started. And it felt like there were hundreds, I don't know, thousands maybe, people marching. And basically it was Romanian soldiers and probably some Germans who were ushering everyone. Um, what I want to backtrack a little bit is um, to the summer before the war, or before we were evacuated. Um, my sister Ruti loved spending time in the country with her grandparents, and she actually, my mother took her there to spend the summer with her parents. And then when the war broke out, or when the Germans or Romanians or whatever came in at that point, the borders closed. And my mother tried numerous times to try to cross the border to go pick up my sister. And Unfortunately, she was unable to cross the border to come and get her. Um, and As I learned at a later point, somebody pointed out all the Jewish houses, uh, and they collected all the people. I guess the soldiers came to the house and gave them 1 hour to get ready, whatever, to get on the wagons. And I was told that all the wagons, were going in that direction. And we really don't know what happened to my grandparents and my sister at that point. So I'll go back to our march when we came to a stop for the night. My mother and my father, of course, were very distraught that we didn't have my sister with us. And here's a memory of mine where mother went to look. So what happens here is people were so tired and so exhausted that they just collapsed in the gutters of the road. So imagine the road with deep gutters on both sides, and it was all lined with people. People just lay down, and I don't know how many of them survived the night, but they just lay down. And I remember running after my mother as she was going up and down to look for my sister and her parents. And it's just, I don't know how many survived or how many were able to get up and continue the march from that point, or how many died. And typically that's what happened. People were marched, and and, uh, and some just gave up. And okay.
You had mentioned something a moment ago about your family, your father taking a lot of things, a lot of packages. What did your family take with you?
Um, they took whatever things of value that that they think they'll be able to market or barter or whatever. Somehow they understood the Ukrainian mentality, uh, because my mother grew up in the Ukraine, uh, spoke Ukrainian like a Ukrainian, and was educated in the Ukrainian school. So, um, and the most important item that they took with them was a quilt, a feather bed quilt, and it's something that saved our life. Uh, and I'll probably mention that at various points, because that was the most important piece of item um, that we took along, and then they took along whatever items they had at home that they thought would be of value for bartering. Uh, and I had a small job. My job was to carry a little teapot. I was responsible for the little teapot. And it turned out to be very valuable because we did all our cooking in that teapot. Go ahead.
I had a couple questions about the march. Where were you marched to? Where did they take you?
To the Ukraine. We ended up basically, the Ukraine itself, the march itself took a long time. At least in my mind, it took a long time. Uh, at one point, don't forget, it was about October, a late fall or whatever, maybe later. I don't, thereabouts. Uh, and we were marching towards Ukraine, or into the Ukraine, or we were in the Ukraine. I don't know. Uh, in the march itself, a lot of people died on the march, whether it was hunger, exhaustion, or whatever, or beatings or shootings. Uh, and uh, when we finally arrived at a point where the soldiers that were driving us, we were left with a very small group, maybe a couple of hundred people, and they herded us into a barn, just a long barn, and the people just fell on the straw, on all against the walls. And since my father and mother were carrying heavy packages, and the soldiers would always, beat my father with the butt of a gun or whatever to go a little faster, because they were falling behind. We ended up to be the last people to enter the barn, and the only place that was left for us was near the door, near the opening. So we just sort of, lay down on the straw in that area. But we were near the door, and the wind would blow in, and the snow would blow in, and uh, but it's that quilt that saved our life because we had something to cover ourselves. And
How long were you in this farm?
you know, time for a child is a little bit elusive. Uh, I know in this barn, people died daily. I have some horrid memories of a skinny horse in a wagon, uh, filled with dead bodies that were thrown in on a daily. Uh, and even as a child, I wondered as to how come they're all naked. So uh, could be the survivors needed more clothes or something. Uh, but anyway, the barn itself, it was winter. It was December. It was, I don't know. The Ukrainian winters start early, uh, and my father was always busy going to the well. There seemed to be a well some distance from the barn, and he would bring water to help all the people. A lot of the people that were screaming for weren't able to help themselves, and my father was very, best he could. He didn't have food to give them, but he could bring them water at least. Uh, and we also suffered from, my mother got typhus, and she was terribly sick from typhus, and I guess I was also struck with her typhus, even though we were, all close to each other. Uh, and at one point, I guess my father went to the well to bring water or to fetch water for some people, whatever. And I think he slipped on the ice. And I, I, somebody found him at the well and brought him and put him down on the straw right next to Bernie. And guess we found him dead in the morning. So at that point, my mother was left with two children suffering with typhus and a sick child. And so she had to muster up all her energies as much as she could and try to go down to the village and barter for some food. So mother used to tell the story that she took a shirt, a beautiful silk shirt that belonged to my father, and she walked down to the village, and she was totally dizzy, and she found the way down, and absolutely nobody would open the door. They were afraid. They were afraid that we're bringing disease to them. So they were, Finally, there was one nice woman that took pity on my mother, And she said, "Well, why don't you put the shirt, you know, you know, 10 feet or whatever from the house?" And she gave her, uh, put a little milk into my teapot with 2 apples and a piece of bread. And mother used to say that she made it back to us, but she probably spilled half the milk because she was so weak that she could hardly walk. But she said the apple saved her life because it gave her enough energy to start getting better. And from that point, she tried to get down to the village and barter to get some bread or some food for us. Uh, and she became stronger. Thankfully, her health returned to her, uh, and she still nurtured the two of us, by trying to keep us alive. But on the way down to the village, she noticed that there was a schoolhouse right on the road, uh, the main road. And at that point, from several hundred people that were lining the walls of the barn, there were maybe about 30 people left still alive. And then Mother organized the people that survived, and they broke into that schoolhouse, and Mother took one by one of these people and walked them or helped them, or, and whoever was left alive in the barn. And it was about maybe 25, 30 people. They just laid down on the ground all around the walls, uh, and then the problem was how to heat the room, because sometimes even a closed up room gets to be super cold when the frosts are high. And so Mother would take a sheet or something that she had and went out and collected straw and started a fire to warm the room. And that was too many trips. Then she finally got some of the men to help her and says, "Listen, we better go and find some wood because, you can't keep burning straw." Uh, and finally, she convinced some of the men to help her. And they actually broke down some wood from the barn or wood that they collected, and used it to heat the room. One nice story. There was a young man, maybe very early 20s. His feet were frozen off from the frost, and he couldn't walk. So Mother gave him a job to sit near the oven and feed the wood to the oven to keep us warm. But he couldn't walk anymore. So Mother came up with the idea, and I give her credit for understanding physical therapy. She tied a big rope that she found in the barn crisscross across this big room from one end to the other. And she had this young man hold on to the rope and try to walk. And I think she saved his life because he did holding on to the rope and walking the room back and forth, even though a lot of the people were complaining and annoyed at the fact. But Mother said, no, he's got to keep walking. He's got to build up the strength of his legs again so he could walk. And we remember meeting him in Beerschot many months later, and he was able to, he had a limp, but he was walking, so actually Mother did a lot of good deeds. At that point she already got to know some of the Goyim, and we had 2 teenage kids that survived their I guess their parents both died, whatever. There was young kids, maybe 12, 14, I don't know. And they were right near the wall or whatever. And Mother used to, whatever food she had for us, she tried to share with them and some other older people that couldn't fend for themselves. And it's amazing that how cruel some people become, because they would scream at her, "Oh, stop feeding them!" We'd have more room if we'd have if some of them would. Well, it's very sad, but thank God she did save the lives of those 2 teenagers and some other people. And actually came a time where she sort of ran out of things to barter. And but she did get to know some of the women, and don't forget, most of the men were in the army. So it was basically women and children. And Mother's Ukrainian was as good as any Ukrainian, because that was her number 1 language. And so she would at one point have a conversation with the woman that she befriended, and she said to her, "Listen, I'm running out of things to barter. Any ideas what I can do? I can do any kind of work you want." And she asked my mother, "Do you know how to tell fortune?" And Mother said, "Sure, why not?" And of course, Mother didn't know from Adam how to tell fortunes, but she said she could. And she said, "Go over to Maria's house. She hates her husband, and of course." So she would get little stories from one person, and then she would go to Maria and look at her wrist. "So, I see you has your husband. He's in the army. He's not going to come back," or he will come back. I don't know. She made up stories as was suitable to make those people happy. And for that, they gave her milk and bread and some fruits. So, so those, it sort of helped her support us and some other people. Yes.
When you first came to the barn, did anybody stay to guard you?
No. I don't remember guards in the barn. I only remember, I'm sorry, I only remember one point, at one point, that Mother repeated, it's like some Germans came to the barn and asked who wants to return to Czernowitz. And it's a time when Mother was still sick and still dizzy and wobbly on her feet. And she went up to them and said, "We want to go back." And of course, they said, "Oh, go away." They didn't think she was going to make it through the night. Uh, so they were just checking if there's anybody alive, but I don't remember guards.
You, you went to the school, you found shelter in the school. Any idea how long you were there?
Well, my guess is from midwinter, or I don't know, your guess is as good as mine, November, December, whatever, till the spring. And in the spring, somehow we learned that there was a lot of Jews in Beersheba.
What year?
Well, had to be it had to be, let's say, April, May of 42. That would be as far as I can tell.
One more question before I let you go on. Were there any other children with you in the barn or in the school?
No, it was Bernie and me and those two teenagers. I don't remember other children. I don't think they survived. Whether they didn't survive the march or didn't survive the barn, I really don't remember seeing anyone.
You were starting to tell us about hearing that there were Jews in an area. Please continue.
Okay. Excuse me for a second. So when Mother learned that there were more Jews in Chernovitz, because all she thought is, so she started to. She left us in the barn. She left us in the village, the two of us. And there were still other people there, and she started to walk to Beersheba. The walk from there to Beersheba must have been 2-3 hours. Maybe the intent was to bring us all to Chernovitz originally, but there weren't enough left of us, so they left us and took off. So Mother started to go to Beersheba to look for housing, to see whether we can leave the village and join the other Jews in Beersheba. And I think she made several trips trying to find housing, before she takes us there with whatever belongings we had left, to take us to Beersheba. And absolutely nobody would take her in with 2 children. They complained that if they have to hide, the children will cry and make noise. And they as many times nobody wanted to take her in with 2 children. So luckily, as she was looking around, a Mother noticed sort of in the top of a set of housing a chicken coop. It was sort of at the end of the street. And the street, as I remember, was sort of a little bit on a hill going down towards the river. And there was this chicken coop that was as dirty as can be, was not being used. And it had a door going down a few steps. So my mother was very enterprising. And she was she was an original thinker, She was a person that was not shy of any kind of work. I mean, whatever, And she decided to take this chicken coop that was probably a low ceiling with a few steps down, and she started to clean it out. And I guess with she was able to find some. She probably looked around and found some clay or whatever material that she was able to whitewash the walls with them and clean the floors. And I guess even though it was earth and floors, she probably knew to collect goat dung or whatever and polish and clean the floors or to uh, and I remember she brought Bernie and myself while she was working in this chicken coop trying to make it habitable. It had a tiny window, maybe 2, 3 feet long and maybe foot high or whatever, uh, probably a little bit above the street or whatever, the sidewalk. Uh, she would actually have Bernie and myself uh, trot and she took this clay or whatever material she found and she needed to knead it with water to create a paste so she can whitewash the walls with it. And Bernie and I would be trotting in it, trying to mix it with our feet. So just that was our help. So finally, she cleaned it up to make it habitable, whatever. And she found some bricks or whatever. She created a bed and put some straw on some wood or old doors or something from the bombed out houses. And she actually built a stove. Somehow she was able to, she knew how to use the clay or whatever, and she built a stove so we could cook on it. And, with she was really a very enterprising, very original thinker. Excuse me.
Can you tell us, in this area where there were Jews, was this a neighborhood, a ghetto, a small village? What was this area?
Bershut was a ghetto. A ghetto. Bershut was a ghetto. It was very large. Not that I, had a large Jewish population in this ghetto. Details I don't know.
Was anybody guarding this ghetto?
Yes, we had basically the Romanians were guarding it, and some Germans. But I don't know. There were some Germans and definitely Romanians. Whether guarding or I don't remember. Basically, as a child, this was my little neighborhood. There was the street going down to the river, and across the street was like bombed out houses. And behind us was somehow a little bit of a hill because there was a marketplace up there. And I remember Mother used to go to try to buy or sell or buy some potatoes or trade something. Food was a big problem.
Was this the first time you were ever in a ghetto?
Yes.
Warsaw.
Yeah. Yes, yes. Uh, and we were there uh, for probably the 3 years we were there. But you know, life in the ghetto uh, was extremely difficult because food starvation, food was an issue, and uh, you know, it was very difficult but again, they somehow did manage to. There was a marketplace, and they were, you know, the local goyim were probably selling their potatoes or whatever, and I don't know, the Jews were probably bartering or one way or another. It's you know, life in the ghetto. You know, it was crowded. You know, and everybody was sort of fending for themselves as best they can, uh, and a lot of people were very hungry, and I'll just point out one little one. Uh, for example, there was a rabbi, probably from Chernovitz. I don't know whether mother knew him or not, um, who was a very genteel uh, older man, and he was probably too proud to beg. Uh, so mother went up to him and she said to him, uh, "Would you be so kind as to teach my son, uh, and I will feed you or give him lunch or." Uh, so mother had this rabbi uh, teach my brother. Girls don't need to know, so boys need to know. Girls don't need to know. Uh, so daily, the rabbi would come to our chicken coop, to our house, whatever you want to call it, and he would teach my brother. And it was a wonderful deal because my mother had great respect for learning. Uh, she admired learning, and her biggest wish is that my brother should have an education and that we should both have an education. So this rabbi would, instead of spending an hour or two, he probably spent as many hours as Bernie could tolerate, and he would teach him how to daven and teach him Chumash and so on. Uh, and that was a wonderful thing for the rabbi and obviously for my brother. Excuse me. Um, and there's there are other. Basically, hunger was a big issue for us and for many people. Uh, so life in the ghetto. At one point in the summertime, uh, Bernie took me down to the river. Mother allowed me to go with him because somehow there were kids down in the river swimming and enjoying the warm weather, whatever. And as Bernie took me along, and when I came back, I managed to get malaria. So uh, as a little girl, I had malaria, and I don't know how my mother got some quinine or something, but I remember having malaria attacks, and they would put the quilt and anything we possibly had to keep me from shaking. Uh, but just
You mentioned that food was a challenge. How was your mother able to get food if she was running out of things to barter?
you sort of, well, here's it's like you would barter one thing, and then you would have a shirt to sell, and I would have a dress to sell, and says, okay, let's trade. And uh, I don't know. This- don't ask me where, but um, it's just you live by your wits, so to speak. Actually, in one little incident, Bernie came up with the idea, and he says, "Listen, you just bought, a bunch of potatoes. Why don't you make latkes? And I will take him to the marketplace and sell the latkes." And okay, mother thought that was a great idea, So she made latkes. She made a dozen potato pancakes, and Bernie took him to the marketplace to sell them. Uh, and I don't know what price he put on each pancake, because he did not even sell one of them. So he came back an hour later or two, and we all sat down and had a very good meal for a change. Uh, at one point, mother managed to buy a sack of cornmeal. And we lived, all we ate was mamalige. Mamalige is cornmeal mush. uh, and day after day, we would eat this mamalige, because that's all we had. And at one point, I got so that I said, I will not eat another mamalige. That's it. And mother had nothing else to give me but mamalige. So she said, well, if you're not going to eat your mamalige, you have to give me back your shirt. And she undressed me all the way down to my undies, and I still refused to eat the mamalige, but she had nothing else to give me. So one morning, I woke up, and I was sort of alone in the room, and I guess I slept in, and I ran to the door and ran out, and um, sort of a surreal scene, because everybody was just standing there and looking towards the river. And I ran over to my mother. I held on to her, and it looks like the Germans hanged about 4 or 5 people just to the other side of the river. And, uh, everybody just standing there at this scene, looking at the people hanging the other side of the river. So, all these memories. Uh, but the horrible thing about our chicken coop house is the rats. I remember waking up one night, and I kept hearing, mother had a stick, and she would banged the stick on the floor every 2 minutes, and and then you'd have all these rats jumping up and down because you would see their eyes shining, and it was a frightening thing to see all these rats jumping up and down, their eyes shining in the dark, and Mother would be banging the stick all night long to protect us from them. And what happened? She took that bag of cornmeal and she hung it on a hook very high up on the wall, and I guess they were trying to get to it. So. Oh, Horace. There was one other time in the ghetto, but somehow they gathered people into a walled off courtyard. And somehow we were told to go there for whatever reason, I don't know. And all of a sudden, as Mother and us were standing near the wall, we noticed that more and more soldiers were surrounding the wall and more people were coming in. And Mother was smart enough to push us over the wall. And she climbed, somehow we managed to climb over this 6 or 8 foot wall or whatever and run away, because nobody ever heard of all the people that were gathered in that courtyard.
I was just curious if you had any idea who the people were that had been hanged by the Germans.
No. I don't know, maybe people knew. I as a child, I certainly just, no.
There's something that we haven't covered at all. When the Germans first came to your home, to your area, was there fighting? Were there air raids?
I mean, in Chernovitz?
Any of the...
In Chernovitz?
Of the conflict, yes. Or there or anywhere else along the way. Did you ever experience any of the fighting during the war?
Not as a child, no. I don't remember fighting. I guess you got the dictum to pick up and go, and you had to go. They probably, rounded up all the people into the Jewish area of China, the lower part, or wherever was a heavily Jewish neighborhood, and from there to the trains. I wouldn't know.
So you don't remember hearing air raid sirens?
Oh, in Beershot, yes. We had a bombing in Beershot. I remember a bombing that Mother and I were standing at the door post listening, watching some bombing. Actually, there was one thing that, well, okay, that's another subject altogether. At one point, the word came out that they were taking children to Israel. They were children who parents would allow them to go, and they would somehow take him out of the ghetto and take him to Israel, Palestine, excuse me, at that point. And Bernie volunteered to go. And after much discussion, I guess, Mother said, life here, we're likely to die from the bombings or this or that. And Bernie wanted to go with the children transport uh, to Palestine. And she let him go. And they loaded a whole wagon full of children, probably, ages from maybe 7 to whatever. I mean, and the wagon took him all the way to Balta. Uh, Balta was like across the river. Don't ask me where. And it seems that in Balta, somebody paid off somebody to kick off 2 children uh, and uh, and to replace them with their own. So Bernie and another little boy were kicked off the transport, and they were left themselves. And Bernie was about 8, 9 or so. They were left in Balta on their own, and Bernie refused to go to children orphanage that they told him to go to because of the dirt, and Bernie, the dirt and smell. And one thing that we all suffered, and they get it terribly, was lice. Never mentioned lice, but lice was a nightmare in Beersheba and wherever he was. So Bernie and this little boy were begging. And Bernie used to tell stories of bombings and houses burning, and he sort of had this route where Bernie spoke German excellent, like a first language, So between he knew German, and somehow he also knew Ukrainian because he spent time with the grandparents. So he was actually begging with this other little boy, and he would even have some Germans. He would, he was a little blonde. He was a little blonde kid, spoke perfect German, and so, he would, that's how he survived for practically 2 months with begging and burning houses and sleeping in the streets or whatever. And 2 months later, I guess these 2 kids, found by asking how to get back to Beersheba. And 2 months after he left, Bernie shows up back in Beersheba to join us. So we're always grateful that that he found his way back.
Do you know what happened to the other children?
There were transports. There were some brecha or some groups that were trying to smuggle children out of the ghettos, and I hope they made it to Israel. I don't know.
Your sister was separated from you, and for a while your brother was separated from you. Was there ever a time when you also got separated from your mother?
I don't think so. No, there was a time. There was a time when she got word that her mother was one out of 5 children. Mother was number 3. So there were 4 daughters and 1 son, and he was Uncle Leon was the star of the family. He was educated. He was an expert in port. He was he was a very exceptional young man, and so he stayed in Chernovitz because I guess he had enough money to pay off. But after a while, he got also sent, I'm not exactly sure which city, and and some mother got word where he was, and she wanted to go rescue him and bring him to us. And the people talked her out of it. She said, "You can't leave two small children by themselves, and depending upon neighbors to take care of them." And but no, she never left. She never left us. We all her life was to take care of us. You know.
How much? Oh, you can take a drink of water.
Mm. Thank you. Go ahead.
How much did you and your family and the other Jews you were with, how much did you know about what was happening to Jews elsewhere under the Germans and under their allies?
You know, I was 4 or 5 years old, right? So and if you told me what I knew, nothing. This is, you know, a child's life is whatever it is. It is. You live as if you don't that you don't know better. You just know what you have as a child. So did mother have awareness? I don't know. Maybe there were rumors. I don't know whether we knew what else was going on in the rest of the Jewish world. It's only rumors.
Specifically, I am curious to know if you had heard anything about what happened at Babin Yar.
Nothing that I heard mother mention. Uh, I, d- I don't know. It's there's your world becomes very small. Don't forget, there's no radio, there's no communication. There's only one worry. This is to find your next meal, and to stay safe. You know, so it's.
Is there anything else that comes to your mind about your time in the ghetto? Any other memories you want to share?
Well, one night there was a big commotion outside, and my mother woke up, of course, and started to she wanted to look out that little window to see what was going on. And basically, some Germans went into the house next door to us and pulled all the Jews out. And there maybe, I don't know, a whole bunch of Jews out there. And I don't know whether the Germans were drunk or whether they were looking for something, or this was like 12 o'clock at night, or I don't know, late. Uh, and one Jew, one German pointed the gun into somebody's mouth, and threatening them, and uh, and mother was. We were in that little room looking out through this little window, and mother was frightened. They shouldn't find us because somehow they got all those people out onto the street and whatever. Uh, Finally, like two Romanians came on horseback and uh, got these Germans to leave. Uh, just one incident that I remember. Uh, you know, it's hard. it's hard for me as a child to know what I remember, what I don't, because you look at things through the eyes of a child, So, but I always felt protected by my mother, and she lived for the two of us, for protecting us, for caring for us, for so. I don't know. There are probably some other stories, but I remember.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm
Would you like
fine.
to take a break?
No, I'm fine. Here's one other little incident. I guess mother was in the marketplace. I don't know whether she bought or she bartered or whatever. She had a little child's red dress, a little red velvet dress. Uh, I don't know whether it was mine because it was bigger than I was. And then there was an oblava. They came and they arrested all the people that were doing business in the marketplace. And for some reason, I was running up the hill, to find my mother in the marketplace. And I see that there's a line of people uh, being taken to be arrested by the soldiers or whatever. And then mother had just that one little dress or whatever, so she dropped it and took my hand or whatever, and somehow she got away because she didn't have anything that they arresting her for, uh, and and so whatever she got away, she didn't get arrested with some of the other people because they held on to their stuff. And about 2 days later, mother had absolutely nothing to trade or whatever. And she was very disturbed, and I could see that. And finally, 2 days later, she took a very big risk. She took me by the hand and actually went to the Romanian soldiers to tell her that she lost a little red dress that belonged to me. And she cried because she doesn't have anything for me, and would they give it back to her? And believe it or not, there was a decent enough soldier that he went into a big container, whatever, and dug out and found this little red dress, and he gave it to her. And that was probably a couple of days of food. uh,
Okay, we are back. I had asked you about liberation, but before we get into liberation, is there anything that you've thought of that you want to share with us before we go into the next chapter of your life?
There's one thing that came to mind as basically one big question that we have is how did we survive, and how did we manage to live, And as I mentioned, my mother was really an extremely bright and very brilliant woman, and very resourceful. Uh, when she finally ran out of things that she can sell at the marketplace, she had an idea. She took the sheet we had, and she cut it into squares, or she dyed it black, and got some yarn and embroidered flowers and put fringes on it. So she made these scarves that the Ukrainian women love that are black and hand embroidered and with fringes. And of course, we slept on straw, but we had bread. Uh, so she embroidered a scarf, and that worked, and that sold very well. Uh, but unfortunately, it takes a long time to embroider a scarf. Uh, so anyway, she befriended a young woman that was pregnant, lost her parents, lost her husband, and the mother was helping, I guess, and she asked her if she would help her embroider uh, the scarves, and so mother and this woman, I don't remember her name, would embroider. She would help her embroider a scarf, and she was able to support this woman and us with the scarves that they embroidered. And this woman was very grateful to my mother for taking her in. And when her baby was born, it was a little boy. And to say thank you to my mother, she named the child after my father. And it was very meaningful to my mother that my father had a name. Mother was very conscious of always doing charity and helping others as best as she could. She always tried to be helpful or share what we had with others. So it was these are trying times.
Was there anything else you wanted to share?
Oh, there are probably other things, but they don't all come to your mind at once. So we'll have to save.
During the break, you told me about a siren.
Oh, they're really backtracking. Actually, I'm backtracking to before we left Czernowitz, to the time before we were forced to evacuate, to leave Czernowitz. And it was already a time when the trying to what, first you had the Russians there and then the Germans came in. So, well, the history, I'm a little confused on the history there. But anyway, as we were preparing and packing to leave, because my Uncle Leon, which is my mother's brother, actually was hiding a box of gold pieces and valuable things in our basement. So before we left, he came over, and mother took this box and escorted my uncle to his house with this precious box that he was storing. So as they left the house, it was probably late afternoon, and I was probably just at the doorstep playing with a friend or whatever. She asked me if I want to go with her, and I said no. And as a small child, 2 minutes later, I changed my mind, and I ran after them. And I must have been, I was probably must have been 4. And I ran after them. Now, we lived right, our street was called Maserkstrasse, and it ended in the Zentralgasse. So the Zentralgasse was a long street, a wide street. And think of it like Fifth Avenue or 42nd Street in the rush hour. And you're talking probably the curfew started let's say 5 or 6 or whatever. Uh, and the street was extremely busy with people running very fast one way or another. And I was running after my mother and uncle. And at my height, as big as I was, I only saw legs, and I was following legs, and and obviously lost them, and ended up at the Ringplatz. The Ringplatz is like the city central square, and all of a sudden, it was extremely busy, and when the sirens started, everybody started running in every which direction. Because once the sirens go, they probably give you a couple of minutes to clear the streets, and anybody found in the streets after that, it was a curfew. So anybody found in the street after that, they could shoot. And as a little child, I'm at this Ringplatz. I lost, obviously. I knew that I lost my mother at that point. And all of a sudden, people running every which way. And I was left all by myself in this gigantic town square. So what does a 4-year-old do? You just cry, right? So, and didn't know what to do as I was crying. There were 2 Russian women, probably in their 20s, so probably secretary types. And they heard me crying because the streets were emptying out. So they ran back and took me by the hand and ran with me back to their house, because if you were left in the streets, they were afraid of being shot. So they took me to their house for the night. And well, needless to say, my father and mother were hysterical. It's a curfew. If you're in the streets, you can get shot. And my father was walking from doorstep to doorstep, uh, looking for me. And he was wandering the streets all night long looking for me. And luckily, I guess by 6 or 7 in the morning, the curfew was over or whatever. And these 2 women, I don't know whether they were going to take me to the local police station or going to take me to the synagogue they knew of. I mean, they were, and as soon as we passed by Masarykstrasse, and my father jumped across the street, and he recognized me and, grabbed me. So it was just, well, I gave my parents a hard time. What can I tell you? All right, now you want me to go back to Beerschot? That was
liberation. I had asked you about liberation. Unless you have something else to add.
I think maybe we'll go to liberation. I guess we'll go forward 3 years of life in the ghetto, and we were liberated by the Russians. And at that point, the challenge was to find yourself back home. And at that point, we picked up our quilt and whatever else we had left. And I just remember that we were sort of hopping trains. Like if we could hop on the train. I remember being on a train that carried logs of wood. We were sitting on top of the logs. And then I remember we were probably kicked off at certain train stations, and mother would cook a potato on the street by making a little fire from 2 bricks or whatever.
wanted to get a little bit more information about liberation before I have you moving around. Can you give us a time frame? When were you liberated? And I also wanted to know how you were treated by the Russians.
We were, it was spring of 44. Don't tell me when, thereabouts. How we were treated by the Russians, I have no idea. Somehow, it probably took us weeks or months, I really don't know, till we reached the gates of Chernovitz. But the Russians would not let us into Chernovitz. They kept us out because they were afraid that all these refugees, all these people would bring typhus and all kinds of other diseases into the city. And they wouldn't let any of us in. And as people would come closer to Chernovitz, because from wherever they came, wherever they survived, they gathered outside the city, and they wouldn't let us in. And people were there for weeks and weeks. How long we were there, I don't know. But anyway, there were a lot of Russian trucks going into the city, a lot of army vehicles going back and forth in trucks or whatever. And even though we were outside the city, there were, I don't know whether there were facilities or that my brother refused to use them because he ran across this very busy road to relieve himself on the other side where there were wild grasses and what does a little sister do? I ran after him. And before I turned around or whatever, he was going back to the area where the people were. So I ran after him. And I got hit by a big Russian truck. I was run over. And my leg was broken in 3 different places, and whatever other damage the accident had, I don't remember very much. But the Russians at that point, I mean, people gathered around, nobody thought I was going to make it. And they quickly ran and called my mother, who was absolutely hysterical. Survived the war with all her difficulties. But anyway, so the Russians took pity on us and put mother and me into a wagon to take me to the hospital in Chernovitz, and left my brother alone with whatever belongings we still had. So they took me to the to the hospital, and I don't remember very much other than waking up in the bathtub. Probably the first bath I had in 3 years, whatever. And there was a very nice doctor, and whatever, they did the best they could. They mended my leg, and I was probably up in a sling with my leg like this for, it felt like months, so don't ask me how long. And on the other hand, Bernie was left by himself. And so he took everything that we had, loaded himself up, and he went up to the soldiers and started to scream and howl and cry, and so they let him through. And Bernie knew how to find home. And so he they found our apartment. Uh, we called it our house, but I finally realized there was nothing more than a condominium. But that was our house, and my parents built it from scratch, and we found their house, and our furniture that they found in the house was crated up because there was some Romanian high official, whatever, who went to the train station to arrange for shipping all the furniture home. And I think he met with an accident at the train station because Mother found the furniture and the wood from the crating she used to burn and heat the house for the whole winter afterwards. So that was our lucky story of finding our home. And I was a long time in the hospital. I don't remember how long, but anyway, I finally came back. I had to learn to walk again, and Mother was, every Friday night she would light candles for all the screen just went off.
We had an unscheduled break there. I'm sorry. I wanted to ask you were talking about, returning home after the ghetto and after liberation. What efforts were made to find missing family members and friends?
It's a very, very good question. It was all by word of mouth. If you met somebody, you would ask where they were. Did you see? Did you hear? Did you see? Did you hear? And as I said before, we were, Mother was, we didn't find anyone in Czernovitz, obviously, family. And Mother kept lamenting that nobody from the family's alive. And she would light a candle for her parents and for my sister and for, because, she assumed everyone was. But it was all word of mouth. Like you would go to the marketplace and you'd meet somebody and you'd ask, do you know, did you hear, or you were in that village, you in that town or in that time, do you know Frieda Streifler, do you know this one, and so on and so forth. So actually, I'm going to back up to a little story that is a little bit out of place. But after we were back in Czernovitz, and we were trying to live or survive or whatever, the Russians were there at that point, and the Russians were sort of tightening the noose a little bit by new regulations or whatever. But anyway, this is a story my brother used to tell, that he was, perhaps I was there too, but obviously to me it's not a memory for me. So Bernie said that two guys broke into our apartment with a gun. They were trying to rob or steal from us, whatever. So Mother must have been off in the kitchen, and that they went into the house or whatever. And then Bernie started to scream, "Oh, mother, come here. We've got two Jewish robbers, two Jewish thieves." And Mother was answering, "Bernie, what are you saying? What are you talking about?" And one of those robbers was from the same village as the same town as my Aunt Frieda, from Zaleszczyki. And when he heard my mother's voice, asking Bernie, what are you talking about? Who is there? Uh, he thought it was Aunt Frida's voice because my mother's voice and her sister's voice were the same voice. So he called out Frida, you know. Uh, so I guess they started a conversation that he was from the same village, from the same town as Aunt Frida, and that he saw her alive after the war someplace. Uh, so Bernie always said that from those thieves, he learned that Aunt Frida was alive. So from that point, Mother would, when she went to the marketplace, uh, anytime she met people that were from Poland, she would ask him, have you seen Frida? Do you know Frida Streifler? And so on and so forth. And luckily, after a couple of weeks, she found a woman. She said, "Oh yes, I came across Frida, and she just has one daughter that survived." And so the first time that Mother found that she has a sister that survived with one child, and she quickly wrote a letter. And within 3 weeks after Aunt Frida got the letter, or this woman was the courier, I'm not sure, Aunt Frida and her daughter Rita showed up at a doorstep in Czernowitz. So, but these are the only people we found. So detoured a little bit there, but do you, okay, and I don't want to detour too much, but Aunt Frida had a harrowing life during the war. They left their town of, and I guess they felt they would be safer joining their older sister. To be honest, I can't remember whether it was Chortkev or Toast or whatever city. And she was together with her older sister and their family and her husband, and Aunt Frida had 3 children. Rita was the youngest. And they had what they called, I guess the Germans were rounding up the Jews into the square and whatever, and they all ran to a bunker to hide, and Frida wouldn't leave a dirty house, or she had to just finish this or that before she joined it. And she said to her husband and her 2 older children to go to the bunker. She's going to join them in a few minutes. And Rita, being the youngest and spoiled, held on to her mother's skirt and she wouldn't go with them. So they ran off. And of course, when Aunt Frida and Rita reached the bunker, they closed it, and they didn't want to open it for her anymore. So they ran and hid in a building nearby in the hallway, and somebody pointed out their hiding place, pointed out the bunker, and Aunt Frida from the doorstep saw her husband and 2 children and a lot of our family being marched by the Germans to the center of town, and they were all surrounded and shot, and then Frida was able to witness this nightmare of her children and the rest of our family being shot there. Uh, it's uh, difficult moments in life. But thereafter, in Frida, somehow, I don't know, and Frida was a storyteller, unfortunately. I only remember tidbits. She was actually hidden on, she was walking along with Rita, and a woman sort of called her in secretly. And she was on an attic hiding Rita. Somehow it was and Frida, Rita, and the nephew. So and Frida and the two children were on this woman's attic for practically a year and a half. And Frida would do sewing for her all day. And at night, this woman would come and empty the bucket. Uh, and during the daytime, they were not allowed to take a footstep in case the ceiling would creak and somebody would hear them. So that was a very difficult time. And after a year and a half, the woman said there were rumors going around and she has to leave. So they finally, so when they left the attic, they, besides the fact that you can hardly walk because you haven't walked all this time, they were trying to go through a forest, and there were some partisanen, and I guess they, luckily enough, she got a bullet just grazed her on the forehead, but she was all right. And anyway, she had many survival stories of how and the nephew, who at that point was probably around 16, and he was going to go to fight the Germans, and he just took off, and we've never heard from him again, or she never heard from him again. Well, okay, wait. I've detoured, so I think maybe we better go back to Czernowitz. And Frida arrived with Rita, and that was a miraculous reunion, that we had. And anyway, and Frida was a very outspoken, a very gregarious, and but my mother never as a personality, never told stories of the war, never told her heroism or her achievements or her genius or whatever. She was extremely modest and very low-key. But then Frida was more of a talker, But together they worked very well. And in Czernowitz, Mother was very concerned about education. I mean, she respected education. She loved. She did everything she could to make sure that we got an education. And so after the war, since they lost all this time, Mother hired Professor Gross to come to the house and to tutor Bernie, Rita, and they had a neighbor in the house, Aaron Appelfeld. I don't know if you might have read some books by Aaron Appelfeld, but he became a famous author and Pulitzer Prize winner of Israeli. He lived in Israel after the war. The three of them had regular lessons with this Professor Gross to bring them up to speed, to be able to get up to their, because, Rita lost out, Bernie, all children of the war lost out. And, so that was one of the things the mother was very concerned about. Uh, Bernie also, girls, girls don't need to know. Um, Bernie also had a very close friend, Ossie Sheriff, also about his age. And his father was a beautiful guy, a rabbi with a long white beard. And every Friday he would check their Bernie's in his son's pocket to make sure these kids don't carry anything on the Sabbath. So it was a big influence on Bernie's life. So that was also the year that Bernie turned 12. And they made him a bar mitzvah. So they baked some sponge cake and herrings and whatever, and they took it to synagogue, and because celebrating Bernie's bar mitzvah. And Bernie's never attended anybody else's bar mitzvah. So the rabbi said that Bernie should go up and say something. And this is when all his learning with the rabbi in Bershat paid off, because Bernie didn't know what to say and what not to say. But Bernie spoke for nearly 2 hours at his bar mitzvah. So he probably reviewed everything he learned with this rabbi in Bershat. Obviously, people were very impressed, because children of the age of 12, didn't quite have that much Jewish learning as Bernie got in Bershat. And I must say, it was reward for my mother for what she did. So that was Bernie's bar mitzvah. And as we were walking home from the bar mitzvah, a Russian soldier was following us. And my cousin and Frida, they were petrified. And we started to walk faster. And this soldier kept following us. And the indicator started running. We were scared. Why is this Russian soldier following us? Finally, right near the house, he caught up to us. And he said he just wanted to congratulate Bernie and my mother, because he was so impressed when he... So it must have been a Jewish child in the Russian army that heard Bernie in shul. So what else can I tell you? Well, there's probably more to tell, but I think the Russians started to tighten the noose around the community, and it became harder and harder for people to leave Czernowitz. And the question now was that Aunt Frida was a Polish citizen, and my mother was a Romanian citizen. So how can we stay together and leave? And the choice was either Aunt Frida goes to Romania or mother goes to Poland, But there was a Russian general or somebody high up someplace living in the building took over one of the Jewish apartments. And he basically made us Polish. He somehow, I don't know, signed some papers or whatever and gave mother Polish citizenship. And we pretty much, it was all for a bottle of vodka. But by the time we left, it was sort of scary because it was, you know, not too many people were able to leave China, but somehow we got out. And from there, we went to Zalishchik, to my aunt's hometown. And obviously, we didn't stay there. There was a lot of anti Semitism. And we moved on from there to Lignitz, and we stayed there. And there was a lot of pogroms on Jews in Lignitz or whatever. So we went on to Breslau. And we were in Breslau for a couple of months or whatever. And in Breslau, there were a lot more Jews, and they organized already at that point. You had shlichim from Israel that organized kibbutzim, and somehow we were able to, through a kibbutz, or I don't remember exactly how, but the brecha, there's a brecha group that smuggled us across the Alps. So we actually walked probably for a day and a half or 2.5 days, whatever, by foot across the Alps. And so we made it to Austria. Don't ask me the route, I can't remember. In Austria, we were in a place called Lagersteyr, which was, I guess, a refugee camp. There was, all I remember is that we got cans of food from the United States or whatever. So we were there for a few months in Lagersteyr. And from that was a very transient camp in Austria, and a lot of people from there went to Germany, and a lot of people from there went to Italy. And Mother felt that Italy was closer to Israel, so we chose to go to Italy. Yes.
Can you please give us a time frame? When were you doing this traveling? Approximately.
I'd say 46. Probably 46. It was basically like the gathering, the survivors, sort of gathered, and you had to move on, and you had to move someplace. And don't ask me for the details, but yeah, you had to keep moving.
Can you share with us the conditions in these refugee or displaced persons camps? What was that like?
Oh. Besides being crowded, like Lagersteyr, it was very crowded, but yet people were starting to organize, like the Gordonia would send shlichim, and the Beitar would send shlichim, and Mizrahi had shlichim, and they organized people sort of in people associated closer to whether they're Mizrahi religious or they were Beitar, or and these organizations sort of created the social life, and they moved on. And but basically, I don't know who would direct it, but I said, okay, you're not leaving, and they picked us up within short notice and put us on trucks or whatever and moved us to the next camp, So from Steyr, we moved on to Italy. So we were in a place called Milano. We were in Milano, in a place called Scuola Cadorna. It was basically a school, a a school with a courtyard, and it was so crowded. People were 3 layers. We were sleeping on triple triple bunk beds with beds in the hallways, and so they kept liquidating it. So I'll just s- do one little story for in Milan. As you know, mother was very anxious about the education for my brother, so there was a Jewish school in Milan, and mother they signed Bernie and my cousin up at the school. And finally, when we had to leave, because they were moving us to the next camp or whatever, uh, mother arranged for Bernie and Rita to be housed in families so they continued to stay in school in Milano. And so we moved on from there. We were probably in Italy about 3 or 4 different camps. We were in Trani and Barletta, and I don't even remember where else. But I'm going to go back to um, so in one of those camps, somebody came and gave a hip hip hurrah um, talk about um, we have to go to Israel and we have to build Israel, and Israel is going to be our homeland, and we all have to go to Israel, and so on and so forth. And mother was very taken by the speaker. And of course, Bernie and Rita stayed in Milan going to school there while we moved on to a different camp. And so she wrote a letter to my brother and telling him we're going to go to Israel and this is our homeland and this is where we belong and so on. So Bernie gets this letter and he takes it to the principal. And the principal of that school, a Jewish school, got very impressed with the letter. And he organized the whole school. And they escorted Bernie and Rita to the train station with a parade and flags and singing Israeli songs. And then he came to the train station, made a big speech to the whole school about going to Israel and saying goodbye to Bernie and Rita. And so that was quite a celebration for the school and quite an occasion. And then I guess a day or so later, Bernie and Rita arrive in this camp that we were at the time. And Bernie comes in and mother says to him, Bernie, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in school. And Bernie says, but you wrote me a letter that we're going to Israel. And mother said, nah, we're going to go to Israel, but not today and not tomorrow. What are you doing? So after this big celebration, he was too much ashamed to go back to Milan. And so then mother arranged for Bernie to go to school in Bologna. And there was also a Jewish school in Bologna. And again, she found the school or whatever helped find housing for him. And because she was always worried about Bernie's education. You were asking me about the camps. Just generally, they were crowded. When things got a little, let's say the camps were a little bit better than the previous camp, they would take like 8x8 square, maybe I don't know, 8x8 or 6x6 square, and they would put army blankets, and the army blankets would give you the privacy from your neighbor. So if they would take this very big army barrack or whatever and divvy it up into a corridor with I don't know, squares, each family would have their privacy. That was already quite an advancement to living in the camps. At the beginning, the camps would provide you with some food or whatever, but that was awful and hardly worth eating. And again, mother they would hand out packages from America, of clothing or whatever. And mother would wash them, cleaning, iron them, fix them, sew on the buttons and fix the seams and take it to the marketplace. And so that was how she made a living in Italy, whatever. But finally we found, mother found an address of an uncle in New York. He was my grandfather's brother, and he sent us papers to come to New York. So this is how we ended up in New York.
When did you come to New York?
1950. May 15th, 1950. I always celebrate that date.
What were your expectations of the United States?
That's a difficult question. Mother was always independent, and we came to the United States, and my uncle was great. He provided us with an apartment, and let me tell you, in the 50s, if you didn't pay off the super, you could never find an apartment. And of course, he was a landowner. He owned the building, so he provided us with an apartment, and we were lucky. Within a week or two after we arrived in New York, mother said she has to go to work. She has to find work. She's certainly not going to live on charity, and she's not going to live by handouts. So she has to go to work. So my Aunt Rose took mother to 3rd Avenue to the sweatshops and found her a job in the sweatshop. And mother was sewing, and I remember visiting her once, and most of the women she was working with were Italian women, and mother sat there and cried. She would sew or do the hemming, and all she would do is sit all day long and cry. She survived the war. She lost all her family. She finds herself alone in the city, not knowing the language, not knowing, and she's sitting in this. She was never depressed during the war, as she was depressed when she got to New York and had to work in the sweatshop and try to provide for us because she would not take handouts. So the first couple of weeks, she earned $9 a week, and she worked herself up. And she insisted on paying rent to my uncle. After a few weeks we're there, but that was a very difficult transition from being independent to being a sweatshop. And so after a while, there was a cleaning store across the street that the man retired, and I guess some mother took over the cleaning store, and then I think she started to come back to herself, but she must have been working in this. I know I was already in junior high school when I when I went to visit her in the sweatshop, she must have been there at least a good 2 years or so, or better. And then she had the cleaning store, and she took us, she would do repairs. And even though we lived across the street, she was downstairs working till 11 o'clock at night, and then be down there at the crack of dawn. And so it was a difficult transition. It was not easy.
What adjustments were difficult for you?
As a child?
Like learning, coming to the United States, like learning the language, starting school. What can you share with us? What were some of the challenges that you personally faced?
Actually, the thing that if I'd look out the window, mind you, I'm coming from ghettos with fences all around, and all of a sudden we're in an open area, and I looked out the window, and there was a sign, kosher butcher in Hebrew, and I was absolutely astounded that in this open city, whatever, Jewish lettering, there was a difficult start. You start school, but slowly you pick up a language. It's you make friends in your neighborhood. It was the shul up the block, that basically his Rabbi Shapiro was his name, who ran the shul. And he basically gave us a one by one 10 minutes a day or whatever, just to learn to daven, children after a while make friends, and they acclimate. Bernie finished high school in about a year and a half, and he went on to, Bernie went to Yeshiva University. Mother went up with him and told our plight that Bernie wants to learn, and they took him in tuition free. And being a Zionist, as we always, Israel was always in our, always in our mind. I wanted to become an engineer so he could go to Israel and help build Israel. He was so after a while he switched out of Yeshiva University and went to City College of New York to become an electrical engineer. I finished high school and I went on to City College of New York. Anytime we said we have homework, we have to learn, we did not have to do any work whatsoever. All we had to do was learn. But even in junior high school, I used to pass by a store that sold, buttons and zippers and whatever, and they gave me a job to sort buttons at the age of 14. So I did have some sense that mother needed help, and I used that money to buy whatever little things I felt the house needed, and you adjust. You adjust. Children adjust. For mother, it was much harder. But I must say, my mother, who had a fourth grade education, conversed and did business in 7 languages. Obviously she knew Jewish and Ukrainian. From the Ukrainian, she had to learn Russian because she lived in the Russian area, and she actually needed Romanian because we lived in Romania. And when we came to Italy, she had to learn Italian, and she conversed in Italian. And then she came to America, she had to pick up English. So your role, life rolls you, or you roll life, and you adapt as you go. And you have to be adaptive. And Mother was always a forward-looking person. She was not a storyteller. She did not sit and cry about her experiences or the war or her hardships or whatever. She only thought of what can I accomplish for tomorrow and how to move on in life and accomplish as much as you can.
When you came to the United States, how were you treated by the American people that you met?
First of all, we were greenness. So you never really forgot you were greenness. But I, as a child, I never felt discriminated against or whatever, but I had a few good friends, and I, 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 I didn't, I don't have anything to say that, he didn't want to be my friend because I was a refugee or whatever. No.
I have to ask you, several times I've asked you about education for you, and the response was, girls don't need to know. What was it like for you when you were able to go to school and finish so much education?
It was all my mother. It's all my mother's doing. You know, um, she worked very hard. Her whole life was tied around the two of us. Even though she had offers of marriage, whatever, she would always say she doesn't want her children to grow up with stepfather. And so she worked very hard to give us as normal a life as I can. And obviously the United States was good to us. I was able to go to school. I was able to make friends. I learned English. I was more or less a normal teenager, going to square dances and having friends. And, children adapt.
Can you tell us a little bit about your professional career? What did you do?
My professional, I finished City College of New York. Fred went to the University of Michigan to get his master's, and after we were married in 1960, we moved back to Michigan for him to get his PhD in Michigan. I did part of my education in the University of Michigan and got the degree from the City College of New York. Even though I did personnel psychology, I cannot say that I practiced or worked, but I started to buy real estate, and we bought a little house in Ann Arbor as partnership between a very dear friend of ours, Dan Kaplan, Fred, and ourselves, and my brother. The three of us bought this little partnership house, and we built on that.
So you married, and do you have children?
We have 3 children. God bless them. You know, if my daughter is a cardiologist, married a wonderful man, Jonathan Huppert. They're living in Jerusalem. They have 4 children. Uh, one is actually the oldest, finished the army. The second one is a paramedic, and she's actually serving right now in the north. After she finished the army, their son number 3 is in the army now, and the 4th child, Geffen, is going to be graduating high school this year. So, my son is number 2. He lives in Michigan. He lives close to us. He's got 3 wonderful children. Now a married daughter, a son who's going to graduate college this coming May, and a daughter in Michigan State. And my youngest is Amy, married a great guy, an Israeli. He is the head of the UHC library system in New York. And they have 2 wonderful children, Celia and Itai. And Baruch Hashem, we've been blessed.
Have you spoken with your children, your grandchildren, or with students about your wartime experiences?
No. That's the short answer. Now and then somebody would, I'll call it turn me on. Like they'd ask a question or whatever, and then I would babble on and tell stories until they get tired of them and walk away. Not really. I'm not a storyteller.
I'd like to ask you just a few questions about the world today, starting first with Ukraine, since you were in Ukraine. What has that experience been for you since the Russian invasion?
You know, it feels almost unreal. It just doesn't feel. But I have, obviously, I have my sympathies for what those poor people are going through. But do I have any stronger emotions? I don't know.
You have your family or parts of your family in Israel. What has it been like for you since October 7th?
Difficult. What can I tell you? We watch the news daily. Your heart bleeds for every Jewish child that gets killed. It dominates your life.
Is there anything you'd like to add before we conclude?
With watching what's going on in the college campuses right now, with watching all our 18 to 24-year-olds, Jewish children whose sympathies are in the wrong place, that do not have that feeling of Amcha, this love for the Jewish people, the love for Jewish education, the love for the sense of who we are and what is happening in the world. It's absolutely frightening. And I think something has to be done to educate our youth, whether religious, non-religious. Uh, our young people have to be educated where we're coming from and where we're going. And unless we educate our young people to love the Jewish people and to know their history and to feel a love for Am Yisrael, uh, it should be top priority for Jews around the world.
And my last question, what message do you have for future generations who will watch this interview?
I'm not sure I have a message other than know who you are. And I'll go back to giving our youth a Jewish education to know who they are. Uh, that's my only message is we have to change the way we educate our youth, whether religious, non-religious, or unassociated, to know who they are, because otherwise the world will turn against them, just like they did in Europe in the 30s and 40s. And I don't even want to think about it.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you for listening.
Judy, can you tell us who is this gentleman?
This is my husband, Fred. And we've been married since September of 1960. We've always worked together and worked together and stayed together.
Fred, I understand you wanted to say a few words.
Well, we were married for quite a while, and Judy, I just want to mention, Judy talked a lot about her mother. She has a lot of the same qualities as her mother. She has a very mind where she always thinks out of the box. She comes out always with fantastic ideas, always very innovative. And she is responsible for a lot of what we have accomplished is because of her.
Thank you. No,
And I think
it's teamwork.
It's teamwork. Well, and I was a professor for 40 years at Wayne State University in the ophthalmology department, and worked, but always tried to help her in her business. She built quite a large business in Ann Arbor in real estate.
I couldn't have done anything without him, so don't take it seriously.
And I think we have 3 nice children, and we have educated them. All of them are educated, and we never had a scholarship for them. We always paid for their education, and I feel very proud of that. And I think that the United States was very good to us. That we were able to educate our children. They are now all accomplished people in their own fields, and I'm very proud of them. And I'm proud of Judy and what she has accomplished. And I'm proud that I was able to get an education here without paying too much money. At City College was free. I got my PhD when I was at the University of Michigan in electrical engineering, and I used to pay about $90 a semester. So I think the United States has been very good, and I enjoyed my work, and I retired when I was 80 years old as a professor.
Can I ask where you were born, sir?
I was born in Poland, near Sanok, Poland. Yeah, and I was also about 3 years old when we left Poland in September 1st of 1939, when the Germans invaded Poland. We were moved out of our place, and we had to move out from there because there was a Judenrein, not have any Jews in that area. And then we went to the Russian side because at the same time, a few weeks later, Russia invaded Poland, and they divided Poland into half. They had the Ribbentrop-Molotov agreement, which they decided to divide Poland into half, like now the Russia wants Ukraine to take over completely back. So but they took over Poland, and we moved to the Russian side because we had family in the Russian side, and we stayed there till about 1940 for a year, and then the Russians took a lot of the Jews who said they want to go back. The Germans asked them, the Russians asked them, do you want to go back? We said, yes, we want to go back to Poland. We want to go. People never expected anything to happen, what happened later. So one day they came, and they usually come 12 o'clock at night. At that time it was not the KGB, but the NKVD. So they came and they arrested not only us, maybe about thousands of Jews, put them on cattle trains, and shipped them to Siberia. And my parents and my uncle and my two aunts and my grandmother, all of us were taken, and we wound up in Siberia. And there they put us into labor camps. And they had guards. Actually, there was only one guard with a rifle who was the guard for that camp, and we would spend there till 1941, when Germany in June attacked Russia. In June of 41, Germany attacked Russia, and at that point there was a government in England, which the Polish government moved to England and they were able to talk to the Russians, and they released us from labor camps in 41, right after they got attacked by Germany. And we, at that point, were moved to another little place, and my father went to work, my uncle went to work, my aunts worked, and we started making a life there. I went to kindergarten. Many years I spent in Russian kindergarten. So I learned Russian. I was very good. I couldn't speak Yiddish anymore because I learned. Now I can't. I don't remember Russian that well anymore, but I can still understand it. And we learned how to live there, and you learn how to live in the Siberia, and things were tough. Food was the essence, to get enough food for the family.
I thank you very much for sharing that with us, and I thank you both for allowing us into your home and into your lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther.
Can you tell us, please, who are these people in this photo?
Okay, this is my grandfather, Moshe Storper. I believe it, I am not 100%, it's either his sister Pearl but it's most likely my grandmother, Dina Reuser Storper. And the woman sitting down is Moshe's mother. Her name was Fegi Storper.
Do you know when the photo was taken, approximately?
In the late 1890s.
And where was it taken?
In Zalishchik. No, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I made a mistake there. It was probably in Havrileshti, where my great-grandmother Fege used to live, or the town Havrileshti where my grandparents lived.
And what country?
Well, the question was Romania?
Yeah, I know the borders changed.
I know. I don't know whether it was Ukraine or Romania. I don't know. You think, Fred thinks that it might have been Romania at that time.
Okay, thank you. Can you please tell us about this picture? Who are these people?
Okay, this is a picture taken in Chernovitz, probably at the home or the yard of my father's aunt. Now, the woman on the right, that's my mother.
Please.
Celia Lindner. The baby is myself, Judy Swass. The woman right next to the baby is probably my aunt. I'm sorry, but I don't know her first name, but it's a Lindner. The little girl looking up at the baby is my sister Goti. The little boy next to her is my brother Bernie. The others are family, but I don't really know who they are.
Can you give us an approximate year and what country?
Well, this is in Chernovitz, Romania. And my guess, the picture was taken in early 38.
Thank you. And who is this, please?
This is my sister, Ruti Lindner. She was probably around 11, Girl Scout.
And when and where was it taken?
It was taken in Chernovitz. My guess would be probably in 38, 39.
And what country?
Romania. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
She was around 11 here, so maybe I'm wrong on the date. It might be closer to 40, 1940.
Thank you. And who are these people? Okay.
This picture was taken in Lagersteyr in Austria. And the woman on the right is my mother, Celia Lindner. The little girl is myself, Judy Swass, and Bernie Lindner, my brother, right behind me. The man standing on the very left is Dolek Sternberg. I'm sorry. Okay. Dolek was a nephew to my mother, the son of her oldest sister. My mother was the third of 5 children, and Dolek survived the war. I don't quite remember his history, but we were very excited that he found us, and he was on the way to Israel. He went through Cyprus and then came to Israel, and within 2 weeks he was fighting in the was he was taken into the army, and sadly enough he died very, very soon after he got there, because he had zero training. And he's actually buried in Hulon.
When was the photo taken?
My guess is about 46, 47.
Thank you.
And
please tell us about this picture.
This picture was taken in 1946, 47, same as the other picture, except here on the very left is my cousin Rita Streifler, her mother Frida Streifler, and again Dolik Sonnenschein, Sternberg, I'm sorry, forgive me. Judy Zwas is right next to him, and then there's my mother Celia Lindner and my brother Bernard Lindner.
And this was taken where?
In Lagersteyr.
Country?
Austria.
Thank you. Please tell us about this picture.
This is a picture of my mother, Celia Lindner, and myself, Judy Zwas, probably in 1946, 47. At that point, I really don't know exactly where, but I assume we were in Austria at the time, so I assume not too many people at cameras. So that's just a picture of Mother and myself.
Thank you. And this photo, can you tell us about it, please?
It's life in the DP camps, and it's basically a school performance. I, Judy Zwas, am second from the right. And to be honest, I don't remember my friends in this picture, but it was in one of the DP camps in Italy. We must have had a very talented teacher that organized performances for the different holidays.
Thank you. And this now concludes the interview.
Thank you, Esther.